but just because it's going up, that's why our reserves are going down when we do the long-range plan. What is it at today? What's that percent that we have to start subsidizing? Like last year, it was a lower percentage, debt service as a percent. So we have less above 5%. I'm gonna track it, so when we go out in the public and we say, well, our debt's growing over the next 5 years and our debt service payment,
Okay. You believe there's not enough
I
information for you
can't
to
calculate.
determine?
Correct, I
I
cannot.
mean, I know you have,
Right.
I know you have a schedule.
I mean, it's
that shows-
$332.
Well, I don't
it
think
is.
it's relevant to the budgeting discussion, but I'd be happy to follow up offline with you on that if it's of
It is
Okay.
because we talk about debt, all the schedules, and you see different percentages in the right, and it will be confusing.
No, I believe you, because I don't really understand
Okay.
what you're getting at, but I'd be happy to follow up offline with you to try to get a little better clarity,
Okay.
because I can certainly make some adjustments
I mean,
if
I
that's
remember
something.
last year where you showed us a schedule of what the how much the debt service increases and and how you calculate what the subsidy has to be.
Yeah, that was in a long-range plan presentation that we did on September, what, 7th or something?
Or, yeah,
But-
okay.
Yeah.
So-
But it affects our operating budget too. That affects the operating budget to some extent.
True.
So if we could just footnote it somewhere what that percentage is, it would help. And then my last question, I have more, but I will limit it to 3. Just about salary and wages, it says, that there was a vacancy factor that helped us get down to to save 50,000. Do you know what that vacancy factor was? Like what
No, I
percentage?
don't believe I said that. There's some staff turnover, which took higher paid, more senior staff and replaced them with newer
Oh,
staff
okay.
and lower pay rates.
But isn't there also, there's a vacancy factor?
The
meaning
same
that
vacancy
same-
factors as last year, those haven't changed. There's 0.5, and again, that's in the summary, under salaries and benefits, that,
Do you know what page?
0.4,
I was looking for it, I just didn't see it.
again, I didn't bring my matrix with me, but I can find it.
And I would be interested just to
So it's in
know,
a sheet like
Okay.
this, it says salaries and wages. It's on page 26 of my document in the budget book,
well, I
maybe
haven't
a
seen the
couple
budget
pages
book
off.
yet. Is it in the
And-
exact summary?
And yes, it's in exact,
I'll get to it.
this is right here, so it's 23, page 23.
Okay,
And there it delineates that we're still budgeting 0.5 vacancy for the public works and 0.5 vacancy for the police department due to anticipated attrition throughout the year.
and time to fill, right?
That's correct.
But is that what was the actual for 2018?
That was the same budgetary assumption we made in 2018, that's correct.
And is it the projected actual, is that at,
I don't project vacancies throughout the year, it's
well, it affects
Busy
your
work
salary
item.
line.
not for budgeting.
I mean, that's a hard thing to project.
Yeah, no, I just wanna know for actuals, I mean, like, if it was 6 months and we had.
Tyler could probably look into that to see
Okay.
how many months of vacancies we had throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, there's,
If you find that helpful to your budgetary discussion.
Wes, did you have this?
Sure, just quickly procedurally, going back to the parking utility and where this $48,000 goes. Just from a procedural perspective, the question of fact being where we put it prior to having the fee. If we could have that before October 24th, I think it would be helpful. I just want to avoid getting it on the eve of the wrap-up. So we.
No, I'll bring that back to the next meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
A question on the North Shore, assuming the no rent next year, I'm not we should put that on the list, because I don't, if we aren't getting rent, then maybe we're gonna get other income. Or we'll know what the structure of the transaction might be, there may hopefully be money coming.
it would, I asked that question just for,
Okay.
and, Mark said that money, if we did have a sale price, I think we asked it, was, would go into the capital fund,
Yeah,
and so it wouldn't affect the operating. It wouldn't-
Now, anything, and I'll just say too, I mean, for those who, I mean, anything that physically changes between now and the end of, I mean, staff will have a list of updates for changing facts and circumstances, not that. So we'll have one list for that,
right.
and then, like I said, we haven't gotten our shared revenue notices, we haven't got our final health insurance notices, we're working on contesting the workers' comp
But
rates.
you know the answer to his question, because even if, whatever money we would get from a sale or would go into the, you mentioned it would.
Yes,
go into
that
capital,
would be
so
my
it still would be a
recommendation for-
reduction.
Well, we may not
Sale
have a deal
property.
done by the time, we may get a quarter of rent. I just wanted, if we're gonna be cutting services, I wanna make sure
Yeah.
that the budget we adopt reflects.
I'll make
the-
a special note that that is a topic for wrap up to give an update on that.
That's it.
I
Does
can,
anybody else have questions on the general, pages that Mark distributed? No, okay, go ahead, we have a few more minutes.
For COLA, I did talk to Tyler a little bit, at some point, I see we're doing 2% again, and then plus merit. We'll have this discussion later today when we actually adopt the merit program, but we did lower that in 2016, to like 1.5 or 1.7, because we had merit, so it equaled out to the same amount. But it was, so this year I just noticed that it's back up to 2, and
that's what the budget's based on. Current trends are indicating CPI for expenditure restraint to be a little over 2.4.
right, this year, I
So that
understand.
was the metric that we used this year,
2 or 2.4,
2 for COLA.
so not 2.4.
No,
So it's arbitrary because it should be an average over time, right? Anyways, it went up.
it's just the number that was used for the budget. And again, the idea is to kind of try to, if you believe in those kind of things, to reflect the staff wages should be adjusted in some correlation to the CPI index. And the CPI is trading in about 2.4, we budgeted 2.0.
But it never went down when CPI was 0 in 2016.
I can't speak to the past right now, I can only talk about what this is. I mean, I can look it up if you'd like.
Are you proposing to increase it to 2.4 if that's
No, I actually in the future tonight.
Would you like a
want it to
trend
go
on that
down.
too?
Oh,
But because we've never decreased it when it was lower than 1.5 or 2.
right.
So I just figured it was an
Uh,
average, like
CPI.
over a period of time, that's how we factor in our COLA.
Yeah, I'd be interested in looking
I
at
can, I can
CPI
get that
and
information, it's just gonna take a little,
Yeah, because I
I
know
just
we
don't
got it
have-
in North Shore
I
Fire
don't-
Department Board,
I
it was
don't
like at
have it on top of my head.
1.6 for
Yeah.
a 10-year period, it was less
I
than
think
2.
since I've been here, we've had maybe 2 years where it was like at 1.5 and another year it was at 1.75. So I know that we have slightly changed it, but
But we've
it's,
never gone down.
it's always been between 1.5 and 2 for the most part.
Well, the
In the
other,
last
the
3
other
5 years.
consideration
I do
previous
that.
boards have made too is to consider parity between union and non-union staff as well. So that all kind of
Right,
blends
which would
together.
help. But this comes
And I can
first
integrate
before we
that
negotiate.
information into your summary as well.
When are we gonna know from the, union negotiations? I mean, when are, we don't know. 'cause
I'm hoping that if we lowered it here, if it's
Well.
following this, that it would give us more of a say to in our negotiations.
Are
Because
we
they
gonna,
would
are we,
imagine.
is there a possibility that we'll have concluded negotiations by November?
What do you think, Becky?
No,
No.
we meet
This
with
is
them for the
November.
first time on October 24th. We
Oh.
exchange proposals
So
in
we're not-
October.
So we're not gonna have that indicated.
And
Correct.
just as a side note too, the police contract negotiations track other labor negotiations, not necessarily non-union
I know,
staff.
we heard, Go ahead, Jessica.
I'm just curious, is that necessary, and is that something that we need to do to be competitive with other municipalities in the area? Like, is that something that all municipalities do, or like the COLA adjustment, or?
At 2%.
Mhm.
Well, let me just explain really quickly though, just the history. When we did the merit pay, we had step program, and then we had merit, and then we had COLA. And so Tyler and management said, we need to, because we were adding on to the benefits, we needed to get it back to a reasonable amount. So that's why it went down slightly, the COLA. And if DPW didn't agree to the step change, they weren't gonna get all 3 of them. So now we might be going back to a step program, yet we're not adjusting our, we're still gonna have merit pay, we're gonna have step increase, like, we'll hear it later today, and just keep that in mind that this is the third component. So I don't want it my intent isn't to make it less, my intent is to keep it relatively the same.
No, and I think they're all connected. I mean, they are all connected, and, is there some room for flexibility with merit pay to give the high-performing staff
Yes.
higher raise raise and eliminating some of the COLA
That's what we
adjustment.
did.
But does that make us not a competitive employer?
Okay? You know, they're just for information and reflection, you know, every year the salary pay ranges tend to get adjusted with the COLA adjustment. So, and they tend to be the same rate that the board approves for the annual COLA increase. The merit pay is to move people through their pay bracket. Because if you get a COLA adjustment for your wage and your COLA adjustment on your pay bracket, you're always in the same spot in your pay bracket. So that's one of the reasons the merit pay was introduced as the steps started phasing out, is that otherwise there's no real mechanism for an employee to ever move anywhere through their pay bracket. They're fixed at a relative stagnant spot in the pay bracket, short of asking for, of course, specific increases on an employee level basis.
But I think what she's saying is the years that we did go down to the 1.5 plus merit, which equaled or 1.75, that equaled the 2% to make you go through. We're going back to 2% plus now proposing
Yeah,
merit,
when
so.
when Chris proposed the merit, he took the merit out of the COLA.
Yes,
So if you were, at an average, you would get the
We're
COLA, the
increasing
regular
it now.
COLA. If you were not performing, you would have less than that. So I
Mhm.
think that's the point she's
Yeah,
making. is that the
average
merit
COLA
was-
plus average merit would equal COLA.
Right, and
And if you're under average person, you
under the
got
old
less, or
scheme.
above average, you have more.
Under the old
And is that
scheme, and
competitive?
Yeah.
I guess what we're and we can talk, maybe we can talk in more detail later in the meeting.
That's what I would recommend, this is gonna be a subject matter too in your village board today, as I propose the revised program. So you're gonna have some allotted time during your regular.
But
board meeting
ultimately,
to talk
you
about
know,
this.
it's the board's decision on competitiveness, so you can't adjust one year at a time, and, you know, I mean, that's obviously not gonna have a
but we are adjusting it.
dramatic impact on, you know, it's the trend and over multiple years that creates lack of competitiveness between communities.
I guess I just want to echo Jessica's point. I mean, one thing that we don't want to lose sight of is remaining competitive as a municipality in terms of who we employ. I think we can get down to these numbers, but I don't want to get lost in the forest here, and all of a sudden you get to a point where you're non-competitive. So I think that that's
Right.
something that
And I think the
And
trend will help
we are
us.
funding, one of the proposed capital projects is organizational study, which is gonna include a salary, I assume salary survey. Would that be a complete salary survey for every employee?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Correct.
So we're gonna be checking that, should we choose to fund that particular initiative. Did you have something, Tammy?
I did, so I just want to clarify, did you say the COLA was about 2.4?
Right.
CPI.
So
is
then-
CPI.
CPI.
Oh, okay.
Do we wanna
But in
move on
2006 it was
to talk
zero.
about some general issues, or if there's
Yeah.
more questions, let's do more questions, I'm okay with that too. Okay, so the revenues, some of these we had already discussed, correct? So I think the first three, we are kind of shifting out of the general fund to the utilities, but they're not really, eliminating,
Great, I
they're not really eliminating a cost, it's either just going to a utility charge from the property tax.
Is that correct?
So we're on this sheet now.
Because
No, I was just going from his,
Oh,
summary memo.
You're on this sheet?
Yeah.
Mhm.
which page?
I don't know.
Revenue suggestions, is there?
The second page of the memo.
Yeah, I did have a question, because I felt like at a previous meeting, we kind of went through and kind of gave a sort of a quick response about, quick read on what our comfort level was, our appetite was for each of these.
Mhm.
So I didn't know if we needed to kind of like go back.
I think if we can't get to a reasonable tax rate, we probably need to.
Well, I thought that there were some additional ones.
Yeah, so there were
Yeah, there are a
some
couple of them additional, yeah.
Okay, so I'm fine, I mean, however you wanna proceed is fine, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to, you know,
I'm just go-
some of these we did talk
We did
about and
talk
we've gotta
about-
read from
I mean,
the
from my
boards.
memory, we talked about we talked about the first two, we talked about parking meters, we didn't really talk about a wheel tax. I guess the last three we hadn't talked about a wheel tax, and we hadn't talked about, some of the costs that we currently, fund for the school district and whether we should approach them.
Can you?
If I could just, provide some general comments. I think the first three items are items that the board can control in this budgetary cycle. I think the last, items 4 through 7, would not necessarily be something that can impact this year's budget. But again, in the spirit of trying to provide the board with opportunities to consider, maybe some insights into what level you might pursue, going into this summer, and looking towards the 2019 budget. Obviously, if something were to be resolved mid-year related to the school district or some other item, we would try to implement that as soon as we could, but I'm not sure that we can really budget for any of those items since they are really beyond the control of the board by themselves.
So did we, I'd like to talk about the parking meters. I mean, maybe we've talked about it once already, but
Can you answer that question about the first two first? I don't think we got an answer, just, you had asked, before we
just
just move on.
shifting.
Are they just shifting? I just wanted clarity because when we had talked, you mentioned, well, we could fill this hole, like by the time, depending on what tax rate the board feels comfortable with, we could utilize these two, and that's why they're back on the list, but aren't they just shifting? Isn't it more about expenditure restraint?
Again, they're revenue diversification options that take away from property taxes and transfer costs onto
To a fee.
user fees.
Same
They're shifting.
revenue though.
And
They're
then
shift-
the
so-
third item
Okay, but can you just
is
explain?
kind of the reverse of that, and we're taking revenues from the parking utility fund and moving them
I
into the
understand
general
that.
fund.
But my question is, if you're just shifting them, what is it doing? Can you just explain to us?
Sure.
What it's doing in terms
Well-
of filling a budget gap? Right.
Okay.
I don't
You
know.
Well,
want
let me-
to get to zero,
let me-
get
let
you
me-
to zero. I mean,
But
it's
it-
a way to get
Let
to
me
zero.
It frees up
start
some
by,
money.
by the reason 1 and
But it's
2.
increasing the cost to the
Yeah,
taxpayer.
right.
Oh, I see, so you're getting your levy down, and,
Right.
but it doesn't
Just
make a.
shifts
You're
it
moving
on.
it
Yeah,
out of the
okay.
general
Yeah.
fund
Shifting that cost.
and you're
Yeah.
creating a
Right.
new utility charge. So
Right.
the effect to that's what we looked at,
But that's not
we
the
looked at the
intent of why we want
garbage,
the levy
we
to go
looked at the
down.
garbage
Right.
issue.
Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
So
But I
we,
mean,
It would be the same for the school,
Exactly.
for crossing guard services.
Not really,
for
cause they don't
example.
pay, we pay 100%, so if they
Right.
paid
Right, but
50,
the
that's a
school-
savings.
But
the
then the
school
same
taxes,
taxpayers
the
still
taxes,
have to
taxpayer,
pay.
Oh, I see what you're
It's
saying.
the same body of.
So that would be,
Okay, I
I
see
think
what you're
that's a
saying.
discussion that we would wanna have as far as,
That makes sense, I didn't think of that.
If I could just add that items 1 and 2, and 3 to a similar degree are more philosophical from my perspective. Again, what's the appropriate mechanism to charge certain fees? Is it the tax base? Is it in the parking utility? Is it applied to a parking utility purpose, or is it really some other purpose? So, I mean, there's underlying reasons why those items come up. It's not just to create a shift.
But we don't have a refuse.
Well, I-
Well, we
well-
could create one.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think my feeling is, for residents, if it comes on their utility bill or it comes on their property tax bill,
It's not a refuse.
it's not, getting us any closer. But, the parking meters, some of us were in favor of parking meters, some of us didn't say anything about parking meters. Do we wanna do a straw poll, or just add it to the list, or, I'd like to add it to the list.
I would,
Go ahead.
I don't know if we have any additional information of the installation costs and,
yes.
my gut instinct is to say yes to parking meters, but I also wanna know what is it gonna cost to put them in, and how long is it gonna take, and when will we see this $250,000, and is that real, is
I
that number
agree.
real?
Sure.
I agree,
there's also the idea, I would like to hear from the bid as we do our parking study next year, before I would vote for it, and the only reason is, if you do parking meters, you're basically taxing your customers, okay? And it causes an inconvenience. If you do a special assessment for a parking district, okay, which is just the same concept of collecting revenue, you're taxing your businesses. As a business owner, I'd like to know, I would like to give input, if I was not sitting at this table, on which one I would prefer. I think I'd rather prefer taxing myself for the same revenue to the village, because I need my customers, and if I feel like, so business owners will weigh that, but if you gave them that option, all we care about is how can we get $250,000 or whatever it may be, and then there's no outlay of cost. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
So that would make
It would-
sense to have a bigger discussion.
Right, yeah, I mean, I think it is a bigger discussion.
Because it also affects residents, side streets, people
Yeah.
are more motivated to free
Right,
park on
right.
someone's
Right.
street.
It
There's-
does.
And it also is
Right.
not just residents that are being taxed, that means people who are coming who live in Fox Point or,
Mhm.
you know,
Customers.
so, right.
Well,
But yes.
parking is like a, squeeze, it's
Exactly.
always gonna be out there, so,
It's gonna be so fun to talk about it.
So let's put it on the list, and I agree with Jessica, I'd like to have an estimate of the installation costs and, so how, and when we could actually see collecting like how quickly could we install and when would we start getting revenue and have a real estimate, because 250, I assume, was for an entire year of parking meters.
And can we put back on the list, for revenue ideas, I'd like to add to the list, Bart can talk to it, but the question I had was, can we, if nobody's utilizing the metro market, we have 50 spaces during the day, maybe 25, whatever the number is. Can we, since they're on the fourth floor, utilize it for employee parking and have the employers pay $50 a spot? That would be, I know your calculations, I have a different kind, but 25 spots times $50 a month times 12 months is a lot, and it's a revenue getter. I don't necessarily know if we need to change the development agreement, Bart can speak to that more. But anyways, I would like to put that on there, because I do think it's very plausible, we've been talking about it at the Plan Commission.
Aren't we already selling permits for that lot?
Just at night, and
Oh,
so they're just sitting empty. Like, the intent was that they would be customer parking, but what we're seeing is that people aren't going to the fourth floor park for
Yeah.
customers,
okay,
and so
Yeah,
they're
Mark.
just sitting empty,
go ahead.
and we get the employees off the
Um,
street.
two feedback items. Again, staff's takeaway from the original presentation of alternative revenue sources was that we come back in spring with some more information on parking meters. So, if you feel that that's still acceptable, I'd rather not put it on the list during the budget season, because it's just something we're not gonna be able to act on. There's a lot of players that we'd have to get involved. But we can certainly get that information in much more detail as to how, potential meter providers would subsidize and pay for the cost of the meters and all sorts of interesting things like that.
And how
So you're saying that's not really a feasible revenue for 2019?
No.
No, not